Welcome to this session of the NAB Show New York. AI Takes the Field, the A-list panel on the future of real-time sports broadcasting. My name is Adam Sharp. I'm the president and CEO of the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences. We are the producers of the Technology and Engineering Emmy Awards. We had our 75th anniversary ceremony last night here in New York. Some of you were there, and I applaud you for being up and awake with us this morning after the celebrations last night. If you missed the ceremony, you can still watch it at watch.theemmys.tv and on the Emmys apps on your smart platform of choice. And so we hope you join us there. We have a great panel for you today. And before we dive into that, I'm going to go down the line here and ask folks to introduce themselves, and then we'll be off to the races. And we will start at the end with Amir.
Hey everyone, Amir Gilman from WC Sports. We are a sports tech company. We work with different leagues, broadcasters, team in the sports field. We help them automate, distribute, and scale their content experiences throughout different distribution outlets.
Hello everyone, my name is Amit Baga and I work for Comcast. I am the SVP for Global Entertainment Engineering, which means I run the video stack for all of Comcast video products worldwide.
Yeah, so first, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here and to share the stage, with some of my colleagues here. I'm an IBM fellow from IBM. I've been at IBM for about 21 years, worked across the gambit of the business. I think one of the highlights is working on the Jeopardy system, lots of natural language processing, and then moved into sports, where, we do a lot of showcase events for the Masters, Wimbledon, US Open, ESPN's Fantasy Football, and the Grammys. And I think that's capstoned by one of the wins that we had with an Emmy Award just 2 years ago. So thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And we're going to take it off. For the last few years, one of the big buzzwords at this show and at the spring show in Las Vegas was AI is coming, AI is coming, AI is coming. Well, that chapter's over. AI is here. And so we're going to start this conversation a bit linearly, going glass to glass. We're going to start with Amir at the end, talking a little bit about what we're seeing right now in the sports content workflow and the perspective of the creative thinkers and the control rooms and the creation and coverage side of sports and where we are seeing AI getting plugged in right now into that piece of the pipeline. And then we'll move down the line from there.
So AI is coming. AI was here for like 10 years ago. All the people here starting getting their content, their highlights has been used by AI for like more than 10 years. So we're now moving into a different phase of Gen AI, that's, I think, looking at the future. I think what we're seeing mostly from the sports perspective around the workflows, around the AIs, how we can actually start creating personalization using AI. So up until now, we were in a world of a VOD 10 years ago. We laid back whatever they gave us, the rights holders, that what we could have done and could have watched. We moved into more of a VOC, what we like to call in WC, it's a video on command. Now I can go and command what I want to watch. And I think it's going to take us to the extreme of this VOC as to really personalization, with the Gen AI being able to start creating for every person his own sports center, his own storyline of what I care about without him even asking. And I think the corner workflow around using AI and Gen AI is how we get there. So it talks from how I can actually, from a content perspective, can scale my content, because every person has a different thing that he likes. And some people want to just watch the rivals of the NBA in the press conference, and others care only about Bronny James and LeBron James. And you have a lot of different storylines that you need to start scaling up to actually how we, as consumers, as fans, not consumers, because it's also a bit different, can actually experience it in a different level. So that's the whole work for the way we see it from where we're going.
So Amit, going to you next, further down the pipeline, and the consumer there on their couch, on their device, and so on. What are they looking for? We've heard from Amir about the opportunities on the creation side. Your customers at Comcast, what are they asking for? You know, they're used to leaning back and watching the game on their TV. What are they asking for with that new immersion?
Let me answer it in two parts. One of them is you've said a couple of times now that AI is already here. Let me highlight where AI is already being used, where some people may not be familiar how we're actually using AI already in production, because different companies use it in different ways. So it's good to get a view on that, and then I'll go into what customers are asking, or even if they're not asking, what we are doing in terms of enhancing the customer experience. So with respect to AI being here, let me start by saying live sports is the new prime time, and there's no bigger evidence of that than the billions of dollars that companies are spending in getting rights to live sports, and so with that comes really good. It comes with an opportunity to provide really great experiences. Sports highlights, we mentioned all the three companies on the stage here won a technical Emmy for sports highlights last year. Is definitely being used more so in outside the US, because there's a lot of content rights issues in the US in terms of generating clips. But outside the US, we do it for Sky. Comcast owns Sky in Europe, and we produce highlights. You can join a game late and get a recap of the game as soon as you join. And people love that feature because you may miss some key parts of the game. That's one. Multi-view, being able to watch multiple games at the same time. Low latency. How do you minimize the latency? In the US, we have a 10-second FCC mandated delay. But how do you get as close to that 10 seconds as possible? Because there's a lot of latency that comes in from the bits going through the pipes to the glass in your home. And generative AI commentary is catching on. IBM does it for Masters. NBC did it for the Olympics, and in fact, they did it in the voice of the legendary Al Michaels, the daily recap for Olympics. And then there's Hawkeye, which has been there for a long time, which helps with adjudicating calls in sports or for reviews. You may have heard in the last couple of days that Wimbledon is eliminating the line judges role because they want AI to adjudicate the calls on court, which is a big break from their tradition. Their tradition, they love their traditions, and for the first time in their history in 143 years, they don't have line judges anymore. They will not have starting next year. So that's where AI is generally being used currently. So going to more futuristic experiences, in my view, they go in two different buckets. The first one is immersive. You're going to start seeing a lot of immersive experiences emerge, where we are getting a ton of data from the field, from the players, putting sensors on the players, helmets, bodies, etc., and then simulating what a player experiences and getting those views to the customers. Like if a quarterback is throwing a pass, what was their field of view? What was that person seeing, and seeing that in real time. So that's a big one, just the immersive experiences. And as a natural extension, there's also the interactivity. If you were there, what would you do in that situation? If you were the quarterback or a batsman or a pitcher, what would you do in that situation? If a 90-mile-an-hour fastball is coming at you, how would you handle it? Go ahead.
Well, I want to come back to some of the actual technologies necessary to enable these experiences, both on the content creation side and the consumption side. But before I dive into that, I do want to bring Aaron into this conversation, because you mentioned one point that was really interesting to me, which is the replacement of the line caller at Wimbledon. And we've certainly heard the controversies of, when making instant replay available to refs, how that changed the game, and to the extent that you're taking the call away from the umpires and the refs and so on and so forth. You can't throw a tomato and at the AI and call them dirty names from the stands. Ultimately, it seems fans want to have a person they're putting that trust into. And this is something I know you've spent a lot of time on, Aaron. How does this shift to AI shift the relationship the fan has with trust in the outcome of the game?
Yeah, that's a really great and fascinating area. And lots of this is still an open problem of which, the science and engineering is coming together as a community to solve. Some of the techniques that we use is to create what's called a funnel of trust, right? And if you imagine you have all of these generative content pieces, it could be text, video, images, multimedia, it could be sound, but it starts at the top of the funnel. And we have these different measures that could be as simple as regular expressions that look to fact check whether or not the output of the model is correct.
I was told there'd be no fact checking.
No fact checking today, right? No tomatoes either today, I hope, right? So, but with that, we have all of these fact checkers that could be as simple as, rules that could run. And then it could look at what's the relevancy, right, of the content that's created. What's the repetitiveness of the content? But it's walking this tightrope line of how much do we give artistic control of these models, right? And there's different hyperparameters that you can use, right? You can use temperature, which just simply means it's a non-deterministic model so that when you try to sample the output of it, you might get anomalous type results that might not have been the first choice that you would have considered. So every time you run a model, you might get a different answer or a different result. But you can fine tune it all the way up to say, hey, I want the most probabilistic outcome. But then when you do that, you don't get as much creativity out of that model, right? And there's many different types of mathematical techniques. There's top P, top K. There's the BAM, the search width of which you want to have. But all of that is used in a construct to help the creativity, right, of these models. Now, on the other side, you can always inject a human in the workflow, right? That works with AI. So it's this symbiotic relationship between the algorithms and the human so that they can maybe have an opinion, right? As far as what should, or maybe even adjudicate of what content should be produced or not. And then not to get too far in the weeds, but there's these other techniques like few shot learning, which you can very prescriptively control what the output of the models are going to be. There's zero shot learning where, the models clearly can come up with their own style. You can create different personas that can personalize the content towards you so that whenever you read it, it's like theory of mind, where the model begins to understand that, hey, these humans have their own perspectives or these other AI agents have their own perspectives, and it tries to meet those expectations. But all along the way, trust is important so that the human maintains their dignity, right? Such that they're still confident, we still have our voice, as these AI pieces are being used together. Trust, transparency to understanding chain of thought. But so that's, and again, as this evolves as a field and it becomes more and more, applicable to tech, I'm very excited about what we can all do together.
Picking up on, you mentioned personalization. Amir and Amit, both of you spoke about personalized experiences. Fandom is communal. People go to the game to experience it together. They go to the sports bar to experience it together. Do fans miss out on some of that communal experience? They're all experiencing the game differently.
I think the fandom changed. Fandom stayed as I have a fandom. I'll not switch my team. It's not consumers. Our fans are different. But the way they consume it changed, right? It started with short form. You see it, like not as much people is watching the live game as they used to be, but they're still really involved and engaged with what happened, and they're fans and are missing it. They can see it in short form in different ways. So I think this creates a new layer of this, I would say, community that you need to address. You have those fans that are going to be in the live game and going to go to the stadium. They are experiencing this together. And there's going to be the ones that are more social, online, highlights based or clip based, and the others are players fandom. So I think that's when we talk personalization, it talks about those cohorts or group of communities that each one of them has his own fandom that you need to have. So what you're talking about in the past was my community is the ones that are going to have a beer before the game and we go and enjoy. The other was like we watch the full game. Here's everything that happened. And now we're in an era of this online digital fandom that is also, it's still a fandom that we need to start customizing and support them.
I'll just add to what Amir was saying. I think it's a generational shift. If you look at people with more gray hair, it's going to the bar and enjoying with their friends. But I have teenage sons, and for them it is more of that short clips, immersive type experiences, and that's fandom for them. It is the definition of fandom is depends on their age group, in my view.
Does that also? Oh, go ahead.
Something I thought about right now. It's like even stuff they're changing. You know, we have a lot of the big organizations or big companies and leagues are trying to actually get and attract to much younger fans, right? Like if today you watch sports at the age of 11, okay, so you're already older enough to start creating your fandom. But if you go younger, we've seen what ESPN, for example, tried to do with Toy Story and Big City Greens. You might gonna find yourself having a fandom of characters that are actually sports. This is like what Gen AI going to be able to create is now we have 5 years old, 6 years old. They're going to support a new character that is called the GOAT, and it's a player actually, but it's a different type of fandom. So that's also a big shift in the generation that we might going to see coming.
Yeah, both the Toy Story experiment by ESPN and Nickelodeon's Super Bowl coverage, both big winners of this year's sports Emmys. So definitely big investments and great executions there. I do want to go back to a point where I cut you off earlier, Amit, because I wonder if this age difference also factors into the hardware and devices necessary to consume this content and these experiences, because several of these early endeavors you talked about, low latency, multi-view, so on, those tend to rely on the traditional set-top box experience. But then we're seeing a lot of new experiences reliant more on VR headsets and so on that have had, perhaps not as quick adoption as folks like Apple and others anticipated. Where are you seeing that, Ed, and are you seeing a generational divide there in terms of how people want to be consuming sports and sports content?
It's early, but I think there's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem here, right? If you have and in my view, if you really want widespread adoption of some of those VR headsets, which hasn't come, sports would be a big catalyst in terms of that adoption. If you can build really unique sports experiences and you can experience sports with those headsets, you'll get a lot more people using them. So there's a little bit of a chicken and egg, but it is, just sports would be the catalyst to that.
I'm going to shift the question on what equipment is necessary now to the content creation side. And I'm going to embarrass someone in the crowd now. Nick Duggar, if you can raise your hand back there in the corner. So, operates, well, for most of his career, one of the largest fleets of production trucks in the country. For decades, big sporting event. You roll up with one of Nick's trucks. He unloads a whole bunch of cameras. You put them on the game. You switch between the cameras. You feed the game out. That's how you cover a football game. How does Nick's truck have to change for the Gen I world and the new way of covering sports?
Another question. I don't know how much it needs to change. I think it's a lot of, there's going to be a world where, you still from the camera going to need to work on the cloud. We've seen even from an editor's perspective and the live production piece of it is like a lot of like COVID happened. You need to change, say, how can I support it? Not having everyone in the field. Not everybody need to actually be there. So how do we actually need to support much more from content creation, from creativity creation to create a good broadcasting experience? How much I can do it over the cloud what can I shift to start being much more remote related. So I think that's probably one thing we're going to start seeing more and more. I think the piece of storing and having like the growing files is also becoming, we're seeing a big shift into like a MAM on the cloud. So from an asset management perspective, how do I deal with this for post-production, and how can I actually deal with this in creation of those live experiences? So I think from a content creation, we already seen some shift, but it still is, we're going to see more and more new products coming in. They're 100% cloud-based, supported, and not having hard equipment that are costly and need to deal with this. But is the truck going to be needed? I think you still want to need to have the truck. You still want to have the cameras in the field. You still want to need to deal with this. But now you need to take what is being produced and being able to chop it and start selling.
But in the world of skating where the puck's going or having to aim the camera where the ball's going, there's now AI models have a pretty good idea of where the puck is going or where the ball is going, right?
Yeah. So there's a couple ways to, go, in this story. But to me, I'd like to look at the network layer, where typically broadcasting is one to many, right? Where you saturate, signals simultaneously across a network. It's very taxing on that network. Then you could do multitasking or multicasting, where you go, again, that's one to many, except the many is where you have consumers that are subscribed and you know exactly where to route the traffic to. You can also have unicast, where it's one-to-one, which is like a lot what OTT, streaming, Netflix does. But that goes directly from a source to a destination where it's supposed to go. And then the last one is, it's anycast. That's like a CDN where you go and you want to access content and it goes to the closest source that has the content for you and serves it up to you, right? Now, if you break that down into this graph of different nodes, what you could do is take all the generative AI models and put it within these particular nodes on that network so that it could intercept the traffic. It then could inject generative content into the traffic and then forward it going on. And then as time progresses, you could then in turn move those models to the edge. So you have on-device, notions of Gen AI. And then this is where personalization comes in, because when that model is on your device, on the network level, then the model can learn your style, your preferences, and change the content before you see it on the network level. And then back to the socialization aspect, if you have the model that's further towards the source, you could democratize the way in which you fine-tune or train the said model so it has the swath of your cohort that's also looking at the same content that you are. And then it could make that content sort of a group personalized experience. So that's a long-winded answer of looking at the network layer. And then I think in the truck, you would have to have different types of people with skills, maybe psychologists, right? That could better understand, what is happening or what is the output of this system. You might want to have people, data scientists in there as well. But I think the mix of skills might change a bit, along with the technician skills in the truck. I know at the Grammys, whenever we embed people in the CBS truck, we put in content experts that have, some blend of computer science experience, so that we can make sure that the content is ready to go before it actually goes on air or is put out onto digital properties. So it's going to be a shift, and it's going to be a very fun ride, I think, for everybody.
On that point, I think your argument would be the AI has become the content expert because its LLM is the history of all sports. And, you've got NFL Red Zone, where right now you have producers who, based on their experience, are guessing when there's a big play about to happen and switching to that game. I guess my question, Amit, do you need producers to produce a red zone for any other sport today, or can an AI basically tell you when the next big play is going to happen?
You can never get rid of all the humans in the loop, but you can get rid of most of them, with all due respect to the producers. But yes, that's what, if you look at what Amazon is doing with Thursday Night Football, they have ingested every play in NFL history, and they're trying to predict the next play. That's only going to get better, and they're doing it for one sport, but you can take that and do that for every sport where you have the data. So yes, you should be able to do that. It also goes to more interactive experiences for customers. Can you get customers to predict it and pull them in a little bit more? What would you do in that situation? What play would you run if you were the coach?
So, Amir, I'm going to ask you to predict the next play. So we've talked a lot about what's going on right now. Looking, you talked a little bit about, I was here for about 10 years. Now we're in the Gen AI chunk. What's the next wave? What are you seeing down the pipeline 5-10 years from now? Where are we
I
heading?
think the 5-10 years from now is definitely going to be in the focus of Gen AI, and I started with the personalization, but we're going to see a lot of different layers of what does it mean personalization. I really believe that's a really big next phase of it. I think we're going to start seeing the whole audience target trying to expand it. You talked about how much we've been spending on acquiring those rights and the cost of them. The business has changed. If in the past NBC acquired rights, and NBC maybe it's a bit different with Comcast, but acquired rights, they had a cable that was a big business that was able to support it. Now with moving to the direct to consumer, with those direct to OTT, the big focus in the 5-10 years is how do I maximize monetization, revenue for those rights that I got. And I think you're doing it by being able to take one storyline, the base of the game, and being able to break it down to a lot of different stories. And it can be, sky's the limit, but we used like this Toy Story example. It can be a whole new show for kids. It can be specific adult shows. You can have one broadcast is going to be the Al Malico Gen AI broadcast, or it can be, a specific different commentator that is a whole new character. So I think that's going to be the mission of how do I able to actually monetize better the rights that I acquired, because at the moment the TV is not enough to actually make it profit.
Amit?
Sorry,
What do you see in the future? What's in the crystal ball?
it's the immersive, interactive, and gaming experiences in those three buckets, right? I mean, I give some examples for the interactivity with respect to what would you do in the situations, whether it is a simulated experience, whether you're simulating being one of the players, whether it is predicting next players as a coach or a player. And those are the types of experiences where it is, you certainly, that's where the world is going.
Yeah. So, the field of computing, I think for the first time in history, is diverging, right? Because we've typically followed Moore's law, right? Every 2 years, the power of compute doubles, right? And we're still on that trend. But again, the first time ever, we're diverging within paradigms of compute. So we still have classical computing, which uses CPUs, GPUs, TCUs, but now we have quantum computing. And they're very, very different paradigms. And they're after different types of architecture. So if you imagine that the traditional computing curve, the classical computing is going like this, it's still going like that, but now we have another branch going like that in quantum. So I think in the next maybe 5 years, sooner maybe, I think quantum computing will play a bigger role in solving some of the classical computing problems that we have today faster. One thing that I like to, imagine is that imagine a molecule caffeine. Today it takes about 10 to the 48.
I have no trouble imagining.
Right. And so within that cup, it takes 10 to the 48 bits to actually represent and simulate that molecule. That's about 1 to 10% of all atoms on Earth, right? That's very difficult. And quantum, if you take that same problem, it takes roughly 70 qubits to represent that same problem, right? So that scale of which you can, use within a qubit, your spin, your charge, and your directionality gives us 3-dimensional block spheres, they call it. You can encode all these problems or solutions to problems all at once in the same space that you couldn't ordinarily have done. So what this means is that we can now simulate perhaps these live tennis matches very quickly, right? Perhaps, on the cloud, and then make that available within broadcast TV. So all of these forecasting and predictions could be faster. We could have higher confidence values for where that puck is going to go, right? But I think the interplay of both of those paradigms of compute is really going to change generative AI and how it works. You might have hybrid type large language models of different transformer architectures that use both quantum and classical computing. But that to me, I think, is where, we need to use the best tools in the toolbox that's available to help us immerse the fans in more personalized experiences.
I'm going to open the floor for questions in a minute. Before I do, one last question for you. We've been full of optimism here up to this point. What if we're all wrong? Short of Terminator coming back to kill Sarah Connor, where do you see things potentially going sideways? Where, when you look down the road, do you say, here's one thing that I'm worried we haven't quite figured out and we sort of need to get this right, or it goes screwy on us? Wants to jump in on that?
I think we forget that the technology, it's a means to an end. And we sometimes are focused on like implementing new technologies that we don't think about the impact of what it's actually going to do for fandom. Right? We talked about the Wimbledon and La Line. Maybe we will find out that people want the person making mistakes. Like making mistakes maybe was something that we did like in the game. And maybe the referee not having 100% of the calls right was important. So I think that's the thing when I think we're like really focused sometimes into the technology and not putting in like the actual human error place as something that we actually like. So I think that's where I believe there's a lot of risks there.
So AI can make mistakes as well. It's not just humans. But I'll let you answer that one on the AI making mistakes, Aaron. But I'll just say this. We're talking about sports here, and there's nothing better than watching sports uninterrupted. All of these scenarios you talked about, there's a lot of interruption to the normal flow. I can't fathom it, and that's more of a reflection of my age, I think. But what happens if the younger generation also realizes that there's nothing better than just watching live sports uninterrupted and enjoying it?
That's even a cultural difference. I was telling a colleague just the other day about going to watch a soccer match in Brazil, football there. And when gameplay started, every advertising screen in the stadium went blank. All food concessions shut down. Basically, every distraction goes away when the ball is in play. Very different than a stadium experience here in the U.S.
I think they just want to make sure they don't get drunk, but
that too. Aaron, close it up.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think two things come top of mind, right, as far as what are some of the challenges that are coming up or the risks. I think one is power, right? I mean, just look at the amount of drain that just training these foundational models have on the power grid, right? Just to train, for example, the IBM's Granite class of models, you're looking at 100,000 watts of, kilowatt hours, right? And if you look at the human brain, that takes 20 to 40 watts. It depends on how much caffeine, you've had, and so, with that, it's just this absurd amount of drain, and carbon emission, right, that you have, right, on the environment whenever you train these. That's why, there's a lot of flavors, right, of the same models being used over and over and over, because there's very few, large companies that can actually train these size models, get the amount of hardware that you really need. You need thousands of GPUs to train it. So that's one area. And then I think the other, which Amit and Amir, touched on would be, we need to have effective guardrails, right? Because AI can be wrong. It can be very wrong, but it's masked because these large language models produce such sophisticated output that it looks like it's right. And it takes a deep expert to know that it's not right, especially when you look at stats or numbers, arithmetic, and long form content. It's very, very hard to figure out, whoa, it's hallucinated.
Convincingly wrong.
It is very convincingly wrong for, the general public. And I've got stories, about it, but that said, I think having the right guardrails and making sure that people keep, again, I go back, that people have their own dignity, to stand up for what is right. Keep your skills sharp. Don't over rely on these kinds of technologies, but learn how they work. Be able to still do arithmetic. Put away your calculator. Be able to do long division by hand. maintain those skills, because I think we're still going to need to course correct, some of what AI is doing, so that's, I think that's quite important. Yeah.
Thank you. So let's take it to the floor. Do we have any questions from the group here? Yes, sir. Let's go with you. Hold on. The microphone's coming to you.
Hello.
There we go.
Thank you. I'm incredibly curious to hear how, from an industry perspective, a grand industry perspective that you three have, how is the business side of this industry looking at true generative AI, like content generative AI? It's a very sketchy thing, I think, for a lot of producers and editors and whoever, telling an AI, I want an image of this, or I need a video of this. And it's grabbing from existing content, and legally and business and whatever, all of that jargon. It's very sketchy. I think for a lot of us, it feels like if I put this in my video, I could get sued or whatever. Is there a confidence and an investment in that side of AI from a grand perspective of businesses to try to create that into broadcasting, or try to implement that into broadcasting in the future? Or is it, hey, we don't know how legal this is going to be in the next 3 years, let's stray away from this?
Mayor, do you want to jump in first?
Yeah.
You work closely with the rights holder.
We've been, the last year, there was a lot of movement in the Gen AI space, and, our mission, we want to create more content. We want to scale it up. And I can tell you from the rights holder's perspective, the legal pieces at the moment is big. They are investing a lot into understanding what they can or cannot do, what they're allowed to try, cannot try. And I think this is that the way we see it it's the biggest challenge, to actually move it and actually try it out, because there's a lot of tryouts that you need to do until you actually find what is interesting enough and what's engaging enough. So I think, to your question, I think the legal piece is still huge into how they can what they can do or cannot do. And that's where you're going to see like small things like the Al Michaels are like tasked because of legal limitations.
From this side? All right, well, then let's go to you, sir.
I wanted to return to one of the things that Amit said about the creation of synthetic views or immersive views, and something you talked about, Adam, was the role of the truck. In the way that the truck has got 20 cameras on the view right now, but you've got 20,000 of these in the stadium. Not that we would crowdsource, but the idea of having just scores, if not thousands, of very small nodal cameras. Don't you think that, aside from the amount of compute we need today, don't you think we're really heading in that way, and that you could just have teeny cameras all around the arena or the stadium?
Absolutely. I was going to chime in at that point, but we're working with a company in the UK where for some of the immersive experiences, it takes a handful of cameras and small like iPhone type cameras around the stadium to generate that immersive view. Now, going back to the other question that was asked about legal rights, you'd have to do it in conjunction with the right holders, because you can't, otherwise there's always the legal risk. But if you have the rights for the sports, then yes, you do not need 20 large high-powered cameras to generate some of those immersive views.
And in fact, there has been some experimentation in this space. 2 years ago, I want to say, there was a Sports Emmy awarded to, I want to say, Fox Sports. Don't check me on this. For a project they called 10,000 Cameras. And it was at one of the bowl games where they did crowdsource imagery, and they asked all the fans in the stadium to post video and stills, and they stitched that together into a crowdsourced immersive experience of the game, and submitted that, and were honored with a Sports Emmy in one of the innovation categories. So there is early experimentation in that game. Obviously, that had a layer of post-production to it. It was not a live experience, but I think that certainly now that not only do you have those tens of thousands of cameras, you have tens of thousands of cameras that have built-in GPS, built-in wideband Wi-Fi chips, built-in LiDAR. So you not only have those cameras, but you have high-precision location, high-precision data on exactly what they're looking at, so that I think we are getting increasingly closer to being able to correlate those images to each other in real time. Based on where we were 2 years ago when we awarded that at the Sports Emmys, it'll be interesting to see how that iterates.
Yeah, there's a program by DARPA called Finder, where, the grand challenge was, in these remote areas where you don't have people taking all these images, how do you create synthetic data around sparse, pictures, right? And that helps to solve the problem where you might have a match in tennis where a lot of people aren't there to take pictures, so I would recommend, check out the DARPA Finder program, because you might find a lot of information there, just to, explore and to read about.
Any questions from over here? Down in front. Microphone's coming to you.
Thank you. I wanted to pick up on something that Amit mentioned about sensors on players. And I'm wondering, broadcasting has a long tradition of monitoring audiences. And I'm wondering, in terms of analytics, thinking about advertisers, and even the fan experience, what could you do with biometrics, say, on fans?
With biometrics, is that the question?
Well, his question is not only sensors on players, but is there anything interesting to be done with sensors on fans?
You could. So I'll give you a little bit of a long-winded answer. I was in Europe. I was in Europe this summer, and I'd never seen a live soccer game. I went to see one of the Euro Championship games. It was between Slovenia and Denmark, and we were sitting in the middle of the Slovenian fans. They were outnumbered 4-1 in the stadium, and they were down 1-0 pretty much the whole game, and they came back to equalize in the 85th minute of the game. And I had never experienced, I'm a big sports fan, I had never experienced something that happened, which was the eruption of the fans. It was almost like a mini earthquake. And if they had a Richter scale there, it would have measured something. And that the adrenaline just flew through my body, and I could care less about either of the teams, but just that it was so exhilarating to be in that experience. If you could simulate that at home, I would pay for it.
And I would argue that there already has been a lot of work on doing biometrics on fans. Comcast and others have already done work around using social signal to power highlight clips and so on. And the fact that when the fans are all tweeting touchdown or, oh my God, did you see that play? Using that to generate when a highlight gets pulled and pushed to social media, because the rights holder wants to make sure that the rights owned clip is the first video to hit social, and that is what is getting the engagement before some third party or some fan takes a clip off their TV and posts that, and that gets all the engagement. And I would argue that 1 million fans all tweeting touchdown at the same time, or, oh my God, did you see the play at the same time, is itself a form of biometrics on that fan reaction. A last point I would just make in terms of seeing how that type of data can change the experience. My coworkers will roll their eyes because they have to hear me talk about this far too much around this time every 4 to 5 years. The America's Cup is coming up. And Stan Honey, who is the man behind the 1st and 10 line, the glow puck, the strike box, and a lot of these other innovations for broadcast display, is also behind a lot of the on-screen visualization for coverage of the America's Cup. And sailing is extremely difficult to broadcast because depending on the angle of the camera to the two boats, you have a parallax effect where you don't know which boat is in the lead. And so those boats are now packed with sensors on the boats, on the crew, and those are essentially feeding a real-time 3D model of the entire race with a virtual camera that is pivoting around, showing lines, showing the relative positions of the boats, and it completely changes the experience of covering that race. So I encourage you to tune in. Gentlemen, thank you. Can we have a round of applause for these three great panelists?
Thank you.
Thank you.